Welcome to today's module on state and federal policy fellowships for policy and advocacy. This is our second career-focused module on science and technology policy fellowships. In our last class, we heard a lot about the AAAS fellowship specifically, definitely one of the more well-known fellowships, but there are many more out there. And tonight you're going to hear about a few more of these fellowships and where you can find out more about
them. We also have Adriana, who is a former Society of Neuroscience Fellow. She currently is a Principal Legislative Analyst for the UC system in their Federal Government Relations Office, and she's also the Chief Outreach Officer, the Journal of Science, Science, Policy, and Governance. And I'm sure you all are extremely familiar with Adriana already, so the introduction almost wasn't even needed. So last but not least, we will hear from Adriana, who to you all needs no introduction. You all know her very well. And she'll share her experience that she had at the Society for Neuroscience and of course, what she's working on now.
Hello, thank you. I actually made a couple of slides just to make it easier to go through the details here. 1 second. Okay. So I will primarily talk about the fellowship. A lot of these things that I'm doing now, I've learned there. So you probably know that I transitioned into policy in the last 4 years or so through different nonprofits and sort of building on my interests on the biomedical workforce and training in addition to policy at the same time. And so this was a really good fit. Let me go to some of the logistics. So the fellowship is 6 months. It was from January to July of 2019. It's in the advocacy and training department, which is really a great blend of all my interests. And I get to do policy advocacy and training all in 6 months, which is great. I think that's kind of unique to SfN and also because it was in this department. It is a PhD level fellowship. And so I had to sort of convince them that I was a good fit for this because they were very keen on getting a neuroscientist, which I'm not. But because I had already a lot of advocacy experience through future of research and other things, I was a good fit in that essentially the things that I had, they were looking for. And essentially it's pretty much like a lot of these other fellowships that train PhD scientists to learn really fundamentals of policy. So before this, I really had done a lot of things around advocacy, but haven't really been in an office that did that. So this was really sort of the immersion of everything and learning, like Daniel said, steep learning curve, everything quickly, which was actually sufficient to get my job. So I also agree with that. He didn't need a year. So the thing about this fellowship is that I was the only fellow, which has pros and cons. I actually really enjoyed it. SfN is a really good onboarding in that they basically treat you like your full-time staff and go through sort of learning about the organization as a whole and doing orientation with different departments. You really see where you fit in as a fellow, but you're not being treated as somebody who's going to be there only for 6 months. So I really appreciated the personal attention and the people that I worked with, having been really, really very new to the whole policy world. So I did sort of, I guess, 6 different areas. There are sort of 2 major things they focus on are Capitol Hill Day and the annual meeting. So the Hill Day is in the spring usually, so this was March. It's a big part of the fellowship to work on the back end of Hill Day, which is really great. We had about 80 meetings and I learned everything that goes into it, from preparing materials, talking points, organizing the meetings, figuring out how to do the logistics of different groups that were coming to the Hill. Some of it was early career scientists, some of it was leadership of SfN that you have to escort separately. And so there's a lot of logistics in that, who's escorting who and what do you say and how do you craft those things. We also represented SfN at coalition meetings, which is, again, the first time I really had seen how that works. And now I do this pretty much every day, but it was really great to have that responsibility and see how that's done on behalf of a society. And, you know, thinking about this, I think being at SfN was also still helped to kind of be connected to the science, and that I enjoy that there is this sort of sense of community that the whole society is advocating for neuroscience funding and research. And it's a really nice sort of cohesive vision that you're a part of. One other section was more related to research and relationship building. And so two things here. One was building a neuroscience champions checklist. And so a lot of this, and again, I know this now, that relationship building is very important in policy and advocacy, and that they were looking to maintain relationships with representatives who had supported neuroscience in the past and build new ones. And so we developed this spreadsheet with tracking essentially a lot of different representatives in terms of what they had done to support neuroscience research, whether, like, for example, things like floor speeches, lab tours, public education events, tweets, and all kinds of things. And so this was really educational to learn about different representatives, but also think about what kinds of things you're looking at and how do you build those relationships. On the training side, which I really liked, I actually got to be part of reviewing the ECPA program application. So this is the Early Career Policy Ambassadors, which is a program that brings, I think, 10 early career scientists to the Hill every year. And they also do advocacy throughout the year. So it's a nice way to be connected to SfN and also learn these skills. By the virtue of being in this department, I also participated in developing some materials for one of the mentoring classes that they have. So they have a lot of online learning and classes and different ways to teach their members, as well as conversations around diversity. Specifically, we're discussing the Latin American training program, which is really great, and how to engage the diverse scientists in neuroscience research. And that was also really enjoyable. In terms of communication, obviously, as the other panelists have already said, communication is a big part of what you do. One of the first things I did was writing a response from SfN to the BRAIN initiative, which is, again, it's really is a learning curve to learn how to write that way. The Advocacy Network newsletter is basically news that goes out to the SfN membership from the department, having advocacy events that were happening either from the members or sort of general policy things that were going on federally. And so again, I learned how to think about what is important in terms of what you put in this newsletter, how do you summarize the whole event into maybe 150 words, and learn about sort of the landscape of policy around neuroscience research. And the congressional testimony is a really longer document looking at essentially what the president would testify in Congress, which has sort of a section about saying thank you for either NIH or NSF funding, list a few breakthroughs in neuroscience, which is actually pretty hard to figure out 3 major things that happened in the last 5 years and put them in here. And then again, this is a very good exercise, I think, for a scientist to learn how to think about the importance of neuroscience research in a very broad perspective, which I am still learning from, you know, because you are talking about research, but it has to be a very different way of writing than you would in academic research about that topic. So this was a great experience. As far as events as well, again, this was the first time that I really listened to hearings and markups, briefings and neuroscience topics that we actually got to attend, which was all new and exciting because I had never done any of this before. We also were tracking budget-related legislation. That was the first time I read a budget and figured out how much of that was allocated to different agencies. All was very, very interesting. And then for the annual meeting, again, given my expertise in research, I was able to suggest some speakers for a panel that they were organizing, as well as trying to connect representatives to either research labs in the area in Chicago, or think about ways of bringing representatives to the annual meeting to talk to students at their posters and that sort of thing, which is really interesting as well. So all of these things, I actually don't have a slide for my job right now, but all of these things I do. And, you know, I'm really grateful to SfN because this was a bridge between sort of all of my volunteer experiences to actually doing the policy and immersing into it for 6 months and doing all of this, and then being able to leverage that into my current job. And, you know, all these things I'm, you know, doing probably even more because there's a lot of Hill events, there's a lot of writing and summarizing, a lot of responses, and sort of all these things that I did as SfN. I'm doing probably 5 times as much of that, but it was a really great sort of immersion to all of these things in policy and advocacy. So highly recommend that as well. Thanks.
Thank you.